unique and very popular discussion today with Dr. Mintz. But before we jump into that, I want to make sure that you all get to know me and Jan a little bit better, and then we sort of talk about the rules of the road. So, folks, if you're not familiar with the discussions that I generally host, they're in the webinar platform, so you don't get to see the big community, everybody together here. And it's a reminder that if you don't want people to see you, just go down to the lower the corner and do stop video, and you'll disappear, and then you can do whatever you like. But then the other important thing is that, especially while Dr. Mintz is talking, we want to make sure that we all mute our microphones and don't say anything. But without further ado, Jan, would you like to share a little bit of info about yourself and Capital Senior Solutions, and we'll kick this off with Dr. Mintz.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much for co-hosting the event with us. I'm Jan Brito, Associate Broker with Brito Associates of Compass. We have a division called Capital Senior Solutions that specializes in helping older adults through late-in-life move transitions. While we can assist with the sale of a home, one of our main goals is education. We achieve that through regular monthly seminars on various topics related to aging and transitions. We obtained advanced training through the Seniors Real Estate Institute, resulting in a designation known as Certified Senior Housing Professional. We host a free monthly Downsizers Club, a small support group for people who may be years away from making a decision and just need a little help getting started with the downsizing process. It's the first Friday of each month at 11 a.m. Eastern on Zoom. Registration links, along with our seminar schedule, can be found at capitalseniorsolutions.com on the seminars page. So today's topic is the truth about living to be 100. Living to be 80, 90, or even 100 and beyond is a new reality for which few have planned. We're going to find out what every person should know about living to be 100. So let me tell you a little about Dr. Mintz before I turn it over to him. Dr. Mintz is a board-certified internal medicine physician who has been routinely listed as a Washingtonian Magazine top doctor. After working as full-time faculty for the George Washington University School of Medicine for 20 years, Dr. Mintz opened his own private practice, now located in Rockville, in 2017. Dr. Mintz provides a number of unique services, including medical cannabis certification, medical weight management, treatment for severe depression, long COVID, and most recently, longevity and anti-aging medicine, which he'll be discussing with us today. Dr. Mintz continues to serve on the faculty at GW, teaching medical students in his clinic. He's actively participating in clinical trial research and has published extensively on a variety of topics. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Mintz.
Great. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me. It is very exciting to be here this morning with so many participants. It's a big number, and the number keeps growing. It's good to see some familiar names and faces, colleagues and patients, and all sorts of people that I know. So it's great to have everyone. I'm very excited to be with you this morning and talk to you about a topic that I'm fascinated on, and that's longevity and anti-aging. So we have an hour. I will try not to speak for that whole hour and leave time for questions and answers. There is a chat feature, so if you have any questions during the presentation, or at the end, just write them in the chat, and we'll try to get as many questions as we have time for. All right, so I'm going to attempt to share my screen. There we go, and put it in presentation. Here we go. So again, my name is Dr. Mintz. Jan gave me a pretty good introduction. I do concierge. So I do concierge. Sorry about that. I do concierge medicine, but I am closed to new patients. So I'm not taking new patients now, but I do have a number of services that I offer that I am seeing new patients for, which Jan also mentioned. And it's from these services, which started with medical cannabis, sort of led me to a slightly different perspective in the way we approach medicine, which includes complex conditions like long COVID, as well as health and aging. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So start with the question, how long do you want to live? Some might think, most people would say, I want to live forever. I want to live to be 100. But if it depends on who you really ask and how you ask the question, because not everyone necessarily wants to live to be 100. And what it depends on is what we're talking about is what it means to live to be 100. So a lot of the people on this call are in, work with seniors or in the senior community. I've seen people sort of in their 80s and 90s and even 100 with a lot of disability, and that's not what they're looking. If living to 100 means that's not what I want to do. But on the other hand, if you could live to be 100 with vitality and health, then that becomes a different picture. Most people, if I could live to 100 and be able to do all the things that I want to do and exercise and see the grandkids and things like that, then sure. This is Richard Morgan on the right. He is 93 years old, and he's a 4-time indoor rowing champion. And when you test him medically, when you measure some of his statistics, he has, some of the metabolic rate and things like that of several decades younger. And what's really interesting about Mr. Morgan is he only started exercising at age 70. So he's a good testament to it's really never too late to try to achieve health. So what we're talking about here is the difference between chronological age and biological age. You can't fix your chronological age. Chronological age is what's on your driver's license, what's on your passport. You can't fix that. But biologic age is very different. It talks about the aging process. So Richard Morgan, who was a champion on indoor rowing, his biological age is actually younger than his chronological age. And so we like to talk about chronological age as lifespan. What I'm referring to is health span, which is not only increasing your lifespan, but doing it in such a way that you can live with vitality. And I think most people, if they could do that, would like to live for a very long time. Now, that being said, and depending on how your menu is, you might not be able to see the right hand of the screen. I have to move my thing over. But we actually, for the first time in U.S. history, our lifespan has started to decline. This is very scary. So life expectancy peaked in 2014 at almost 80 years. And then in 2021, it cratered to 76.4, going back to the mid-90s. And while COVID may have played a role, this decline started way before COVID. And so we used to be, right in the middle of the pack as far as other sort of wealthy nations, but now we're an outlier. We're down. We're doing much worse than other wealthy nations as far as lifespan. And so there are a lot of things that play a role. Opioid epidemic that we have here, gun violence plays a role. But really the greatest factor that's causing this decline in life expectancy is chronic disease, especially obesity. So this is unusual because we have all this wonderful health technology, cutting edge therapies to prevent heart attacks and for cancer and things like that. Why all of a sudden are we seeing a decline in life expectancy? Well, I think there's a lot of different reasons for this. One of them is consequence of widening economic disparities that are unique to this country. I mention it because I think it's really important. I'm not going to really talk about that. That's like a whole separate topic. But from a medical standpoint, I think there's 3 big things that have gotten really worse in the last few years that are causing this, curious decline in lifespan. The first is the toxic environment we live in. The second is stress. And the third is the current approach to healthcare. So we live in this horribly toxic environment where we, especially in the United States, where we have high calorie foods that are highly processed. So even some supposedly health foods are mixed and matched and things like that even they are not really healthy. We have pesticides. Even if you get organically grown produce from Whole Foods, even the way we grow our crops, the soil lacks the nutrients that it once did. And so it's not just about the calories. There's lots of things about our diet. We have pollution in the air. We have these forever chemicals that stick in our water and other sources. Even global warming has played a role. When I went to medical school, we thought that Lyme disease you could really only get if you were in the Northeast. Now you can get it almost everywhere. There's mold exposures. We have plastics and chemicals in things that we use every day, like cookware and cleaners and cosmetics, and just our current environment sort of or social situation really discourages movement. Many of us spend time in the car commuting to work, sit at a desk for most of the day, and then commute back home. So while all other countries, westernized countries, have some of these issues, a lot of these issues seem unique to our country in particular. So I think that's one problem. The other one, and probably a main one, is stress. Again, everyone's got stress, but we tend to be, I think, more stressed in the United States compared to other countries. We tend to have two incomes in a household. We will walk long hours. Our family is dispersed. Many times you have to fly to see your loved ones and relatives. In other countries, family is not nearly as dispersed. I talked about commuting. Our obsession with social media. People are on Facebook or on Instagram or checking their emails all the time. We're in this 24/7 news cycle. It seems like a constant crisis, and there's always things going on. And so I think increased stress, even recently, with some of the global and political changes here in the United States, have caused this. But the other one, and what I want to focus on, is sort of our approach to health and wellness in a traditional current model. And I'm not talking about problems in the healthcare system. That also plays a role. You can't find a doctor. It takes forever to get an appointment. You can't afford medications. That's important. So I don't want to discount that. But even if all that were fixed, the general approach that I think we have to the healthcare, to treating patients, I think needs to be altered. So our current system is very focused on testing and treatment and symptoms, and not really on prevention. So, you have a stomach pain, so you'll go see a gastroenterologist and they'll do an endoscopy and you'll get a prescription for Nexium. Or you have some chest discomfort, so you go see a cardiologist, they'll do a stress test and they'll give you a statin. That's basically the way we do things. And I'm not knocking that system. I mean, that system works really well for a number of things. If you have cancer, you should go see an oncologist to get therapy and not rely on natural things. Or if you have a heart attack, go to the emergency room and get that treated. So this approach to healthcare works really, really well for acute diseases. The problem is that most of the problems that we have are chronic diseases, and that's what's leading, as I said before, to this decline in lifespan. 6 in 10 adults have a chronic disease, and about 90% of our $4 trillion expenses in healthcare are due to chronic diseases. And that current healthcare system doesn't work well. So seniors, your typical checkup, and again, I see seniors all the time, typically we'll do some vital signs, height, weight, blood pressure, a physical exam, we'll do some blood work, maybe for cholesterol, diabetes. We'll talk a little bit about diet and exercise, but that tends to save, for the end and not much discussion. If you're lucky, your doctor will make sure that your vaccines status are up to date. And then once you hit 50, we'll start talking about cancer screenings. And that's what typically we do, but that may not be enough. So for example, even the cancers that we check for, a lot of the cancers we don't screen for. We just don't have screening techniques for it. And even with the ones that we do, we're not really preventing cancer. We're just trying to pick it up early so you won't die. Like, that's not cancer prevention, that's early detection, which is a little bit different. And even if all the cancer was eliminated, if we could get rid of cancer, life expectancy would only go up by about 3 years. So while this stuff is important, I do this every day in my practice, it's probably not enough. And so what I've come to learn and come to appreciate and started to practice in the last few years is something called functional medicine. And this is the definition from the Institute of Functional Medicine, so I'll read it verbatim. It uses a comprehensive approach to prevention, health, and well-being. It treats the root cause of disease and restores healthy function through a personalized patient experience, all while being a vital partner with conventional medicine. And it asks why an illness occurs or restores health by looking at that root cause. And it's described as the clinical application of systems biology. So again, it's looking at the cause of problems and trying to treat them rather than giving a pill or something else to sort of fix the symptom, by looking at these root causes. And what's meant by systems biology is that we're not just a collection of organ systems, a cardiovascular system and a pulmonary system. We have this unique network of systems that work together simultaneously in complex ways that our current system just doesn't address. So again, I showed you this tree, I showed you the top of the tree. The functional medicine looks at the roots, looks at the root causes, or the bottom of the tree. And many of the things that we have, that diseases that we have, are caused by and can be fixed by changes in lifestyle, like sleep and exercise and stress reduction and what we eat and relationships and things like that. So our traditional approach to disease, so let's say you have type 2 diabetes, your doctor will say your sugar is elevated, here's a pill to lower the blood sugar, and please try to lose some weight with diet and exercise. A functional medicine approach will take it a little bit differently. They'll say your sugar is elevated to not just what you're eating, but a dysregulation in multiple systems. So one important thing, we need to reduce your stress to lower your cortisol level, because cortisol increases sugar. And we need to switch to not just try to eat less, but a plant-forward diet that's not rich in nutrients, that is an anti-inflammatory. We want you to move to enhance your metabolism. We may try some supplements and use medication only if necessary. So functional medicine doesn't negate, it partners with traditional medicine, but tries to sort of save some of that stuff for last. So my own take on basically how this all works, how our bodies work, what is functional medicine, how that's applied to aging is we are evolutionarily designed to survive. So for millions and millions of years, from bacteria to plants to the first animals, all the way up to us, we've gained that genetic wisdom so that we are the best species as it comes to survival. So survival is in our genes, and there are 5 key systems that we've evolved to help us in survival. So this is beyond like the cardiovascular system. These are biologic systems that work together to keep us healthy. And so when these 5 systems are functioning well, they keep us alive and healthy. And when they're not functioning well, they cause disease and they also cause aging. And that's the connection. So more importantly, these systems were designed to protect us and help us survive in a different period of time. And a lot of the changes in our environment and lifestyle in today's society is working against our genes. And so it's working against those patterns. And then there are several key stressors to the body that get those systems out of whack and cause disease and aging. And so here are the main causes. These are big, broad categories. Genetics is important, but it's probably only 25% of all diseases. So you can have a risk for a disease, but 75% of what makes us sick and what causes us to age are things like diet, exercise, whether or not we smoke. And the big 3, especially for severe diseases, are toxins, infections, and stress. And so, as I mentioned, those are the causes of illness. Those are the causes of aging, quite frankly. And the 5 systems that work on this are neurohormonal mitochondria, inflammation, the gut microbiome, and detoxification. So I'll go over these really quickly. But these 5 systems working together, again, are what keeps us healthy and prevents disease. But when they're out of whack, causes disease and leads to aging. So neurohormonal, we've got lots of hormones. We've got our adrenal gland, our thyroid gland, our sex hormones. We've got brains and nerves that help keep us running, and they help to protect us. So one example is the fight or flight system. So if you can imagine back in less than modern times, you were being chased by a lion. We were genetically evolved through evolution to gain this sort of fight or flight response. And so if we see a threat, our eyes see a threat, it sends signals to our brain. And through our brain, we have our vagus nerve, which tells us to speed up the heart rate and then slow down things that we don't need, like digestion. It sends signals to the adrenal gland that tells us to release cortisol, which releases sugar so the muscle can use it for energy, and to release adrenaline from the adrenal gland, or epinephrine, to give us that energy to run away. And then assuming we don't get eaten by the lion, all those things calm down and go back to normal. The problem that we have today is this stress. This system that's helped us to survive these so many years doesn't understand the difference between being stuck in beltway traffic and being chased by a lion. And so when you constantly in this fight or flight stage, this causes a breakdown of all those systems in the body and could also lead to aging. So what do you do about that? There's things like exercise, meditation. There's treatments like vagal nerve stimulation. There's certain supplements that you can take. There's medications for other hormonal issues as well. The mitochondria are very important. They're the energy producers. So if you think about energy, you can think of gas in a car or electricity from a battery. Our energy is chemical energy called ATP. And basically the biological equation of life is the food that we eat plus the oxygen we breathe. The mitochondria, these little tiny organelles and cells, make that into carbon dioxide, water, and energy. And what's interesting, what I didn't realize until really a couple of years ago, is that when we're under stress, either through a toxin or an infection or just general stress, the mitochondria stop producing energy, and they take that oxygen and instead turn that oxygen into something called radical oxidative species. And so when you think about antioxidants or oxidation, that's why we take antioxidants, because we want to stop that process. So immediately, it actually is a good thing. It actually destroys the virus. It destroys the infected cells. It leads to inflammation, which we'll talk about in a second, which initially, when you have a threat, is a good thing, but at the expense of energy. And again, if we're in certain circumstances where we're constantly exposed to toxins or viruses or things like that, the mitochondria sometimes will get stuck and they'll stop making energy, and that causes fatigue. And so treatments for issues with mitochondria include the diets that we eat, exercise, supplements, things like that. I mentioned inflammation. Again, inflammation is normally a good thing. You get a cut or a scrape, your body sends those inflammatory cells to essentially repair and heal. Now, initially, there's some pain and there's some swelling and some redness, but eventually things calm down and the body kills the bacteria or heals the wound, and that's good. But if you have too much inflammation, if you have chronic inflammation, over time, that's going to lead to tissue damage. And this process happens all over the body. And so things, the foods that we eat can cause inflammation. The toxins that we're exposed to can cause inflammation. So the way you treat this is through anti-inflammatory foods, going with a low sugar diet, gluten-free diet, adding certain, basically fruits and vegetables that are rich in these things called phytonutrients, which basically calm these things down. If you eat fish, that has some omega-3 fatty acids, which are very anti-inflammatory. Stress reduction is important. Certain supplements, like you can take omega-3 as a supplement. Certain medications can help with that. The gut microbiome. So we have, in our gut, we have about 40 trillion bacteria, okay, that live there. We're only made of about 30 trillion cells. So you could argue that we are more bacteria than we are us. And they're, again, designed to protect us. So if you can think about it, the only way things can get into your body, unless you have a cut, are through the mouth and through the lungs. And so these gut bacteria are here to protect us from other organisms or toxins. And again, designed there to help protect us and survive. Also, they play a major role in the immune system. Most of our immune system is in the gut, and they're the largest producer of serotonin, which is an important transmitter in the gut. So we have this symbiotic relationship that the bacteria in our gut keep us healthy, and we feed them to keep them to survive. But if you have inflammation, if you have a poor diet, that can cause a disruption of those bacteria, and sort of the bad bacteria overgrow and cause inflammation, could cause the gut to sort of leak, where things that are not supposed to be absorbed get absorbed. And so treatment is, again, I'm repeating myself, but things like diet, exercise, stress reduction, and you can also use things like probiotics and prebiotics and things like that. And then the last major system is detoxification. Again, even before we had all these plastics and chemicals and stuff like that, there were toxins that our predecessors were exposed to just in nature. Just because it's natural doesn't mean it's not toxic. And so we developed this system over time to help us get rid of toxins. And there are many ways to get rid of toxins. The liver is the prime sort of organ that does this, and it sort of conjugates things and gets them in a form that we can get them out of their system. And there's only 3 ways to get toxins out of the system: pee, poop, and sweat. But again, if you have inflammation, if you have too many toxins, if you have problems with the gut, this system doesn't work. So again, diet, exercise, stress reduction will also help. There's certain supplements. Sauna is a really good way to detoxify. Again, if you can increase your sweat, you can get rid of toxins. So to give you an example of how this applies to aging and disease, I'm going to look at dementia and Alzheimer's. So here's one study. I'm sorry this slide is so busy, but basically it looked at the bacteria in the gut of patients with early Alzheimer's disease, and found that the patterns of the bacteria in the gut with patients with Alzheimer's disease were very different than similar age patients without early Alzheimer's disease. So that, and it also correlated to the beta amyloid protein. Here's another study with just multivitamins and some cocoa were actually able to improve cognition in patients who had mild cognitive impairment. Basically, vitamins plus a little chocolate improved memory. So the foods that we eat, the bacteria in the gut, things like that are so important to disease and aging. And an expert in this category is Dr. Dale Bredesen. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's written a couple of books about ending Alzheimer's and his program that basically reverses Alzheimer's. And so what Dr. Breslin says, it's not just like one protein, like amyloid protein. That amyloid protein is a sign of Alzheimer's, but it's all these different stressors that cause Alzheimer's. And in fact, there's multiple kinds of Alzheimer's. So he talks about inflammatory Alzheimer's, which is a result of inflammation. He talks about atrophic Alzheimer's, which is more about nutrients and hormones, and then toxic Alzheimer's, which is again caused by or primarily by different toxins and pesticides and things like that. And so what's his program that reverses Alzheimer's? It's nutrition, it's exercise, it's brain activity, it's getting good sleep, it's giving hormones if needed, it's giving supplements if needed, meditation and other stress relief things that he does. It's fixing the gut, and also looking at, are there gut issues, are there infection issues, is there toxin exposure? And he tests for those things, and if he finds them, he'll use various programs to treat that, and has some health coaches. And so here's it's a small study. It was only 19 patients, but you can see over time these patients, improve dramatically. And if you compare this to, so there are about 3 drugs approved by the FDA, the 3 in the middle, they're tens of thousands of dollars. And while they're better than nothing, they don't really improve cognition, whereas his program, the RECODE program, actually improved cognitive scores. Here's a larger study of 255 that did a similar protocol. More than half the patients showed an improvement, and almost a quarter of the patients showed no change. So again, if you start early with mild cognitive impairment and you show no change, that's a good thing. Only about a quarter of the patients actually showed decline. So this is very successful. So there's a way of actually reversing or stabilizing Alzheimer's and dementia with just simple diet exercise techniques. And so that's where I want to get into the longevity. What can we do to not only live to be 100, but live healthy, have that health span so that we have vitality at 100. We're able to do the things that we want to do. And no surprise, it gets into some of these things. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen Blue Zones. I highly recommend it. It is a 4-part series on Netflix. It talks all about living to be 100. And so what it is, and it's based on a book written by Dan Buettner, who's an anthropologist, and he found there were 7 or 8 different zones throughout the world where people lived longer. So with the percentage of the population that were centenarians were much, much higher, extraordinarily higher than anywhere else in the world. And not only did they have that longevity, that they had a lifespan, but they had a long health span. So as an anthropologist, he traveled to all these areas of the world and tried to find out, well, what's the secret there? Is it something that they ate? Is there something about the climate? Like, what's the secret? So I don't want to give away too much. I encourage you to watch the series or read the book. But basically, he found a couple of things. One is exercise and not going to the gym. All these people have natural movement in their daily regimen based on where they live and what they do. They had a good outlook. So it was like good stress reduction. So they had a purpose. They took time to wind down. They ate very healthy. They had mostly plant-based food. They had a little bit of wine, but at dinner with lots of friends and family, and they tried to eat less. They had a very good positive outlook on life, and they were connected to the community. That social interaction was, he found, very important to longevity. So again, I encourage you to watch the series. The question is why? Why do those things happen? And so again, it's those 5 key critical systems. The way to keep those critical systems functioning well, preventing disease, preventing aging, is by things like lifestyle, diet, exercise, stress reduction, sleep. If you address all of these life factors, not only it can even reverse aging. It can restore health. So people with disease like Alzheimer's, it can restore them. And for people who are healthy, it can actually reverse aging. So I'm going to end with looking at a few biomarkers. So biomarkers are just things that researchers have found that are associated with aging. So going back to Richard Morgan, the indoor rower, when you say, how do we know that he's biologically younger than his age, you can look at some of these markers. Now, we already talked about 3 of them: mitochondrial dysfunction, chronic inflammation, and gut microbiome dysbiosis or problems. So they found that if your bacteria in your gut are out of whack, your biological markers are more older than your chronological age, or they're associated with aging. Chronic inflammation, same thing. Mitochondrial dysfunction. I want to talk about a couple more, and one in particular is epigenetic alterations. All right, so I'm going to try to make this quick. I don't want to be too sciencey, but basically, all of our cells have our genetic code. So all of our genes are are in every single cell. And it has the whole map of what we do, from the color of our hair to what hormones we make. All the whole map of the body and what we do are in our genes that are in every cell. And so years ago, we actually mapped the entire human genome, and we thought, oh, this was going to solve everything. Once we know the human genes, we can figure out where the diseases are and find cures. That didn't really happen. And a lot of it has to do with that fact that only about 25% of disease is related to genetics. So one researcher said the genes are what loads the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. So genetics looks at the risk of disease. Epigenetics are how our environment interacts with those genes. So as it turns out, so if you think about it, your hair cell doesn't need to produce saliva, and your salivary gland cells don't need to grow hair. So the whole code is in the genes, but different genes are turned off and on to perform their function. So everyone has the master plan, but depending on the cell and what the body needs, genes are turned off and on all the time, and different things do that, and lifestyle is very important. So there's a lot of different ways in which this happens, in which the triggers cause genes to turn on and off. Methylation is a very important process. It's one of the most important processes. There are others. And so in addition to regulating how our genes are expressed, methylation is important. It's important cell division. It's important to synthesizing adrenaline, which I'll come back to. And it also, we talked about how does the liver get rid of toxins? Methylation is important to that. And what's fascinating is how we interact with our environment, not food, toxins, exercise, social interactions, turns genes on and off. So again, not to get too sciencey, but here's sort of a picture of a genetic sequence from a young person and an older person. And if a certain methylation pattern will turn on a specific gene that keeps us healthy, but if you're over methylated on a certain gene, it will stop that gene it'll turn off the gene essentially, and we start to age. And this also can happen in cancer genes too. So we have genes that actually, suppress cancer, and if we turn those suppressor genes off, we can get to cancer. Now, what's fascinating is you can actually measure these methylation patterns, and they correlate very, very well with longevity and time to death. They can very accurately predict when you're going to die. So you really can see what a biological age is versus a chronological age based on things like epigenetics and specific methylation. So you can actually measure aging. And again, what's great about this is that we can actually reverse it. Just like Dr. Bredesen reversed Alzheimer's, we can reverse aging. So Dr. Kara Fitzgerald is a naturopath and put someone on a lifestyle program. It was just 8 weeks: exercise, meditation, sleep, a couple of supplements, some pretty stringent dietary guidelines, and had a health coach around to help people master this. And what she found is in 43 healthy women, after just 8 weeks, based on methylation patterns, she was able to reverse age by over 3 years. And in a second study that looked at women, she was able to reverse it again in 8 weeks, just by 4.6 years in 8 weeks. That's pretty incredible. And so what did she do? She had a certain diet that was nutrient replete in these methyl donors, that was anti-inflammatory, antioxidant. It was low in sugars, moderate in protein. There was no alcohol in her protocol. Tried to minimize toxins, avoiding plastic food and beverage containers, eating low mercury fish, encouraging organic, things, animals, if you're going to eat it, that didn't have antibiotics or hormones or things like that. And so what it turns out is the things in our life turn off and on these genes. So again, there are these things called phytonutrients that are found in sort of things that we eat that help in a positive way, give a sort of lower your biological age. So I'll just pick one. So lycopene is one of these things that can turn on good genes and turn off bad genes, and you find them in tomatoes and grapefruits and cabbage and things like that. There are vitamins in certain foods that we eat, proteins and vitamins, things again that change these methylation patterns. But even stress, if you're very stressed, that's associated with with biological aging. And again, going back to what I said before, because methylation is important in making adrenaline, and adrenaline is part of the stress pathway. If you're always stressed, and you're making a lot of adrenaline, you don't have enough methylation in your body to turn it off and on the right genes. And even exercise, it basically winds back the clock. Even after a single session, you can see changes in these methylation patterns. So the last thing I want to talk about, and then I'm going to take lots of time for question and answers, is cellular senescence. Okay, there are more things, but these are the most important ones. And so basically your cells are always dividing over the lifespan, and different cells divide at different rates. But every cell can divide up to about 50 times in a lifespan, and that's all they got. They can't divide anymore. Normally, when what happens when the cell reaches their 50 divisions, okay, the body has this amazing process called autophagy, where what it does is it basically takes some of these cells, okay, and recycles the good parts, and things that it can't use, it gets rid of. So it's this fascinating process where we're clearing out these old dead cells or cells that can't divide and recycling some of their parts to build new cells. So it's a fascinating process. But sometimes, usually because of DNA damage, poor methylation patterns, a number of different things, these sort of cells that can't divide get hung up, and they're called senescent cells. And sort of instead of this autophagy, they sort of hang around. They're called senescent cells, or also referred to as zombie cells. And there's a lot of problem with these zombie cells. They can turn into cancer cells. They stimulate inflammation. And just like a zombie, if it bites you, you turn into a zombie. It recruits other healthy cells to be zombies. And so these zombie cells are really important. So for example, if you take blood from an old mouse and inject that blood into a young mouse, it'll make them old. And vice versa. If you take young mouse blood and inject it into an old mouse, it'll make them younger. And so one of the reasons why they think that is because of these factors, these sort of zombie or senescent cells, and they're associated with aging. And the same thing happens in the mitochondria. Just like the cells, these older cells sort of die and recycle, the same thing happens in the mitochondria, where it's called mitophagy. And so if you have poor mitophagy, that's associated with aging. Now, the good news is that there are other things, of course, diet, exercise, lifestyle, all those things promote autophagy and prevent these zombie cells. And there's other things that you can do from a supplement standpoint. So two important factors, and I'll try not to be so sciencey. There's something called AMPK, which is AMP activated protein kinase. It's something that we have in all of our cells. All mammals have it. And it's like a fuel gauge. It's basically an enzyme, to make it simple, that acts as a fuel gauge. So when you need more energy, AMPK turns on to boost it. And if you need to conserve energy, because let's say you're starving, it turns it off. And so fasting or calorie restriction will actually boost AMPK. It tells you to burn that energy, which is great. And so if you have high levels of AMPK, it induces autophagy. Metformin is a medicine we use for diabetes. It's actually been shown to boost AMPK. And so it's all people who take it, because it's associated with some weight loss, it's almost like a sort of a fast in the pill. It sort of mimics fasting. And then hormesis is basically good stress. So I'm talking about stress as a bad thing, but it's not always bad. The saying, what doesn't kill you make you stronger. A little bit of stress can be good. So can be good. So if you imagine if you're exercising or lifting weights, you're stressing your muscle, but that's a good stress that's building muscle. But if you did it for too long, you could start damaging your muscles. And so what hormesis is sort of good stress. So a couple of examples are like sauna. Sauna increases AMPK. It's a good stress. It also gets rid of toxins. Or the other people are starting to do are these cold plunges, which can either be done in a tub or even your shower, with just a little bit of exposure to cold water that sort of stimulates your AMPK and helps with autophagy. The other thing is mTOR, which stands for mechanistic target of rapamycin. And so what this was, I had the picture of Easter Island at these statues. They were examining the soil and were able to find this component, rapamycin, which they named after something to do with Easter Island, which was found to be an antifungal agent and an anti-cancer drug, and it's even still used today to treat cancer. They also found that this sort of target, this mTOR, if you give rapamycin, it actually suppresses autophagy and may even increase longevity. And they also found that if you increase animal protein, that drives up your mTOR. You actually want mTOR to be lower. And it drives it up. So one of the reasons why some of these plant-forward diets seem to be associated with longevity and health may be because if you have too much animal protein, it drives up your mTOR and inhibits autophagy. So what can you do? So senolytics are anti-aging supplements and medications that work either by increasing AMPK or blocking mTOR or increasing autophagy and mitophagy as other mechanisms. And these are things that can be found in food, or you can take them, as a supplement. Spermidine is found in wheat germ. Quercetin is found in like apples and onions. Phycin is found in strawberries or other berries. Resveratrol is from the skins of grapes. There's a thought that, the sort of French paradox, you drink wine and that can be helpful. It's because they have a lot of resveratrol. Even caffeine in small amounts, don't get too excited, can increase AMPK, especially if it's coming from green tea, which has ECGC in it. And then, as I mentioned, there's some medications that may also work on aging. All right. So with that in mind, here's sort of the final summary of how do you do it? How do you reverse aging and increase your health span, not just your lifespan, but your health span? So basic stuff: diet, exercise, sleep, stress management, and reducing toxins. So diet, plant forward. Some people are convinced you have to be vegan or vegetarian. I'm not really clear about that, but it should be mostly plants, fruits and vegetables. And it should be minimally processed food, natural, whole food, food that you can sort of pick or grow or make with a few ingredients, not with chemicals. Generally low in sugar, minimal alcohol, and because gluten and dairy can be inflammatory, a lot of these protocols have gluten or dairy free as part of it. Exercise, you got to do it most days of the week. Okay, ideally with a partner to get that social aspect in, and it shouldn't just be one thing. You have to focus on your aerobic capacity, but also building muscle. Muscle mass is strongly correlated with longevity and health span, preventing falls and things like that. Flexibility is also important. Sleep, you got to get at least 7 hours of good, high quality sleep. It's really important. Stress, again, I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons why we've seen decline in lifespan over the years. It's toxins and stress. And, it's hard to, we can't, all necessarily live on a, deserted island and have no stress, but there are things that we can do like breathing and meditation. And again, finally, anything you can do to get rid of toxins, clean air, clean water is so important. Filtering your water, using less plastics, trying to make the products you use at home as clean as possible, trying to get organic food when you can or where it's important. All these things will help you. There are testing and treatments also that you can do. So you can look at, so just general stuff that is either free or not too costly or should be covered by your insurance. So you can do a body composition analysis. That's a pretty cheap test, may be covered by insurance. There are certain, so in addition to the typical biomarkers like, your good cholesterol and bad cholesterol, there are other biological markers that you can look at to see if you have cardiovascular disease. There's a carotid ultrasound that you can do to see how much plaque buildup. You can do MRIs of the brain to see, do you have early signs of Alzheimer's or dementia? And if so, get on a more aggressive protocol. There's also a free test called a cognoscopy, where it's basically an online test where it's sort of a brain test to see how well you function. Again, you can do that. I mentioned the biologic clock measurement, So the methylation you can do, but there are other markers too. They're not as accurate as methylation, but you can look at like your white blood count and your glucose level. And there are certain biological markers that are part of just a routine testing that if you look together is a good predictor of age. Hormone replacement seems to be important. It's highly correlated with aging and disease. And so if you have low testosterone or low estrogen, replacing that can be helpful in aging. And then there's certain supplements that you can take, probiotics and the vitamins. If you can't get the diet, it's very hard to do all the diet stuff. So the diet is the most important, but the supplements can help. And then there's some advanced stuff that you can do that may cost a little bit, but you may decide is worth it. So hormesis, sauna. So that's a picture of my sauna in my house. I have a sauna. If I could have the time to use it every day, I would use it every day. I love it. I try to get in there at least 3 times a week. There are these total body MRIs so you can better than, we only have these sort of 3 or 4 cancer tests, try to pick it up even earlier. There's a Gallery cancer test. The Gallery test uses methylation, but it uses the methylation of cancer cells, not human cells, or not your cells, and can pick up like 50 cancers super early. I mentioned what functional medicine is. And again, in the Breslin protocol, in looking for the causes of Alzheimer's, he tests for things like microbiome and toxins and hormones and metabolism. And you can do those tests and see if you have problems there. So if your gut microbiome is off, you can actually test for that. And that might be able to sort of help you develop a certain diet and supplement regimen to help with that. Unfortunately, those tests and often the treatments are not covered by insurance. I mentioned the methylation test. So you can get a very accurate age, but again, it's cost money. You can look at your genes. Again, they're only 20%, 25%, but they are important. There's some other of these sort of advanced supplements like the senolytics that I was talking to. So sure, regular vitamins, omega-3s, things like that you would find in any CVS are good, but there are some of these other things that we mentioned like quercetin. And then again, I mentioned briefly about the medications. So I've just begun doing this. You can go to my website, but basically, what I'm trying to do is to do these tests on patients, help incorporate sort of personal lifestyle recommendations based on the testing, and give you a treatment regimen to follow some of these principles, these functional medicine anti-aging principles that I talked about, and help you sort of to, live your best life for as long as you can, increase your health span. So typically what I'll do is, even before the visit, we'll have you do a lot of, surveys and information. I'll see you in the office. We'll do a consult, we'll do an exam, we'll do the basic testing, or if you want the advanced testing, we can do that. And then after we've got all the testing done, we'll start you right away on some basic stuff. And then once we have sort of all your numbers, we'll come up with a personalized plan for you as far as lifestyle and treatment. And again, we can do the advanced test. All of that's included in the fee. The advanced testing or treatments, sometimes they cost, like the total body MRI, for example, that's an extra fee. It can be pretty pricey, but it can also be pretty helpful. But for most of these programs that cost extra money, I get a special discount. So if you're in my longevity program, and then I'll contact patients throughout the year to make sure that they're doing well, and certainly answer any questions and things like that. So that's what I'm doing now in my clinic. And so, again, so here's my contact information. My website is drmintz.com. There's my email. You can email directly. My office is right across from Pike and Rose at 6000 Executive. And again, I do other things, including functional medicine, long COVID, treatment-resistant depression, medical weight loss, cannabis, but just started doing just now longevity and anti-aging medicine. And we got about 15 minutes left. So I timed it exactly right because I wanted to make sure we had time for question and answers. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I believe we've got a bunch of questions in the chat room. I'm going to have Steve or Jan sort of queue that up and start with the Q&A.
Yeah, there's some questions in the chat, and there's a lot of information that's been shared as well. So for those of you who might like to save the chat, if you go to the bottom of your chat window, you'll see 3 little dots. And if you click on those 3 little dots, the first option that comes up in the menu should be Save Chat. And that way you can capture everything that's been put there. Let's start with a question from our own Pamela Mills. When Dr. Bredesen uses terms like reverses Alzheimer's, how many people actually had a diagnosis of Alzheimer's? What stage in the disease were they at in the process?
So so he's got a number of different studies. I showed 2 of them. He's got multiple publications. Each of the publications are a little bit different, but in order to, these are published research studies. So they were all diagnosed with Alzheimer's in those specific studies. There are other similar studies that looked at mild cognitive impairment. So it's different things, but again, he's got a lot of information, the books, all the published, but so yeah, so most of those patients, what I'm saying, Alzheimer's confirmed. Now, how you confirm it is a different story, because the only way to know for sure is you have to do a brain biopsy, which you can't really do in most patients. So it's usually a clinical diagnosis based on how impaired they are cognitively, as well as there's different imaging techniques that you can use to sort of, make that diagnosis. And when he looked for improvement, he was looking primarily for some biomarkers, as well as how they improved in their cognitive skills. So in the first slide that I showed you with the small study, they were measuring, what's the cognition actually improved. So some very fascinating work that he's doing. I do not do his protocol yet. I may do that in the future. There are some other providers in the area that I know specialize in that, but it's very fascinating stuff.
All right. Elva asks, can telomere regenerate themselves if a healthy lifestyle is adopted later after the telomeres have shortened?
That's a good question. So I know you could reverse methylation patterns. I believe you can also you can definitely prevent it from shortening. So again, there's so much of this topic I couldn't. So on the list of 12 things that I mentioned, I didn't talk about it, but telomere length is very important. And so telomeres are these things that are on the end of your DNA that when your DNA opens up to sort of, opens and closes to turn off and on things. And then, the shorter they get, that's just correlated with aging. So telomere length is typically not used in a lot of these studies because it's not as reliable as methylation. But yes, I believe you can also lengthen your telomeres in newer cells, but not as much though as, once your telomeres are short, they sort of stay short. You can lengthen them a little bit, but it's more about preventing them. But there are other things. There are many, many things. So telomere length is one, methylation patterns, there's all these different things. And so what's good about the intervention that I talked about is they address all of them. So going back to the Alzheimer's, that's a good point. So the protocol works the less Alzheimer's you have. Meaning, if you're in late stage Alzheimer's, it's going to really, really be hard to reverse that. But people who have, more mild cognitive dementia or early onset Alzheimer's disease, you can delay progression and maybe even reverse that. But at some point, it's like cancer, right? So you can, prevent cancer, or you can catch cancer early and treat it. But once you have like metastatic cancer, there's almost nothing that you can do. So it also depends on the stage of things, and that's similar to the telomeres. That if you're both biologically and chronologically 100, you can't expect to do all this right away and extend your life that much. But that being said, if you go to, again, this Richard Morgan, he didn't start exercising until he was 70. So you do have some leeway. So it depends on what the impairment is. So that's answering a bunch of questions at one site, I guess.
Okay, more questions. For supplements, is there a list of purity levels and companies preferred? Not all supplements are the same, even with the same names.
That's a complicated question. That's an hour talk. But the quick answer is whoever asked that is completely right. So supplements are regulated by the FDA, but they're not regulated to the same degree that prescriptions are, because supplements are basically food. So as long as there's not poison in them, they're using safe things, there's less regulation. So when you buy supplements in like the grocery store or the pharmacy, there are things that you could look at, like a USPC symbol and stuff like that. So there are different, and there's like 3 of them. USP is probably the most common one. And there's different levels of purity. So for example, athletes, if they have a trace amount of something, they can not play, they get fined. So there's different levels of purity. And so not everyone sort of notates their level of purity. And so you have to be careful with what you buy. I think in general, if you use a reliable brand like a Nature Made and they have a USP symbol on it, they're probably okay. I prefer, however, the professional supplement companies, because they go the extra level that you won't typically see in something, in the pharmacy, and certainly online. Like you can go on Amazon and find stuff that's, half the price of what I recommend typically, but there's a purity question as well. How important that is unclear. So yeah, I recommend at a minimum using recognized brand supplements that have a USP symbol. For my patients, I tend to recommend for especially some of the newer ones. Like, so for example, vitamin C, if you get a fancy vitamin C, probably doesn't matter as much. But if we're talking something like, some of these senolytics like quercetin and ficin and resveratrol, I prefer to go with some of the professional supplement companies. There's a number of them out there. There's Designs for Health, there's Zymogen, there's Life Extension, there's a ton of different ones.
Dr. Mintz, there's a few questions. You talked about your sauna, but I noticed that there were a few questions sort of asking about hot tubs and steam rooms. Like,
can you hear me, Jan?
I can hear you. Steve is frozen.
I got the question, so I'll answer the question. Steve, you froze for a second. So anything that you do to sort of shortly sort of shock the body, if you will help. So heat is good but if you're just sitting in a steam room sort of relaxing, that's okay, but it's not as good as a sauna because sauna is making you sweat, whereas steam is just sort of nice, or a hot tub is just nice. So it could help, but I'm not actually aware that there's longevity data on steam rooms and hot tubs. I am aware that there's longevity data, mostly in animals, but some human data on cold plunges and sauna. What's interesting about sauna is the one that I have in the picture is an infrared sauna. So that's a whole nother talk as well. So not only you're sweating, get rid of toxins and boosting your AMPK, but it also emits a certain infrared spectrum that charges mitochondria and does other things. So not that the sort of traditional coal saunas that you think about like in Sweden or something like that, not that they're bad, but some of these newer infrared saunas can do like double duty. So I'm a big believer in those. I would do it every day if I had the time.
Someone's asking about hormones for testosterone. What about dangers of high PSA?
Again, that's an hour-long talk. It's very complicated. Traditional medicine is sort of slow to move. So there were some concerns about all hormones. So with female hormones, there was this concern about breast cancer based on a women's health initiative. There's some small studies that concern about prostate cancer and even cardiovascular health with testosterone. But if you look at the preponderance of the literature, that doesn't seem to be true, especially in terms of female hormones, because some of the studies were not using natural hormones. It turns out that it may not be so much about the hormones, but the kind of hormones that we are using. So natural hormones, or what are called bioidentical hormones, are the hormones that the body naturally makes. So there may be some harms with synthetic hormones, which were like in medicines like Prempro and stuff like that. But if you're using the bioidentical hormones, it should be okay. The other thing you should think about is that, so for example, so if testosterone really caused prostate cancer or cardiovascular disease, you would think that you would have higher incidence of that in patients who are younger. So when you're young and you have high testosterone, if there was a correlation, you'd see more prostate cancer in younger men and more heart disease in younger men. But that's not the case. It's the opposite. Same thing with breast cancer. If estrogen really caused breast cancer, the women who would get it would be young, not the older women who have low estrogen. So it's very controversial. You'll probably hear different opinions from different doctors, but sort of diving into sort of the functional medicine literature, I'm a big proponent of hormone replacement for those patients who have low hormones or have symptoms with less than optimal hormones. I don't believe in giving extra testosterone for someone with normal testosterone just because they want to, be a wrestler or supercharged. Like, I'm not talking about that kind, but for replacement to get to sort of what are normal age levels, I think there's benefit for both men and women.
Another question. After moving from high animal protein to plant-based, all my tests and overall health are good. However, struggling with weight gain. Any suggestions?
That's good. So that's good. That's good that you changed and you saw the evidence of that. So weight is a complicated thing. It's about metabolism. It's things like that. So while plant-based is good, better than necessarily, again, you don't have to necessarily, I'm not a believer in going all vegan. Again, you'll hear different opinions, but I'm definitely a believer in what I call plant forward, meaning you should eat as much of fruits and vegetables as you can. You should try to minimize your animal-based protein. If you're going to go with animal-based protein, fish is the best, poultry is maybe second, and beef is sort of the last. So again, you'll have different people say different things, but I think we all agree that plant forward is the best to do. But you could be plant and not healthy. So rice is basically a plant, right? So if all you're eating and wheat is a plant. So if all you're eating is pasta and rice, while that's while it's a plant-based, that could be sort of the carbohydrates that are not good. And if you're eating too much of anything is a bad thing. So you could eat just hard to eat too many fruits and vegetables. But it's really hard to do that. So I would say you could probably eat as many fruits and vegetables as you want. But if you start getting like corn, for example, if you just eat a lot of corn, that's not necessarily a good thing because so it's calories. So you have to look at what kind of plant-based foods am I eating? Am I eating good fruits and vegetables that have all these phytonutrients, or am I eating non-meat-based stuff, but things like rice and breads and cereals and pastas that are high in carbohydrates? Because you have a high carbohydrate diet, that could cause insulin fluctuations and that could lead to weight gain.
Steve, while you check and see if there are any other questions, I wanted to remind all the attendees that this is being recorded and will be available both at Steve's Positive Aging Community site as well as on the capitalseniorsolutions.com site on the seminars page where you'll find the video library.
Yeah, no, lots of great comments that everybody can see in chat. I'm really interested in this Dementia Demystified that about Dr. Kat Toops. It's there. We did get a few questions. Dr. Mintz, your practice is based in Rockville, Maryland.
Correct.
But you're part of this functional medicine group. We put that website there. Are there other people practicing functional medicine throughout the country?
That's glad you asked that question. So functional medicine is different in many ways. And one way that it's different is it is not a medical specialty per se. There's not a board of medicine that does functional medicine. So the Institute of Functional Medicine has courses that you can take. You can get certified with them, but it's not limited to physicians. So pretty much anyone in the health field, that's a practitioner, a nutritionist, a dietitian, a chiropractor, a nurse. So there are people in the area that practice functional medicine. There are not many physicians that practice functional medicine. I'm a big believer in general, not just functional medicine, but in general, our healthcare system, that we need all hands on deck. So I support nutritionists and dietitians and nurse practitioners and chiropractors, but what's important is that you sort of need to practice to your level of training. And so, there are certainly nutritionists and dietitians that do functional medicine that will likely do a better job at customizing a diet for, let's say, someone with Crohn's disease, that I may be able to do because I don't have the time, and they don't teach us a lot about. I've learned more about nutrition in the last couple of years than I have all of medical school and residency. So I think there's a role for other people. But if you're interested in some of this anti-aging thing, where there's a lot of science and there's a lot of sort of conventional medicine like heart disease associated with it, or especially if you have a disease like a long COVID. I've been doing that now for the last year. It's really complicated. It applies the same principles, but it's really complicated. I obviously have a bias, but I would see a physician, a medical doctor that also does functional medicine. Again, that's my bias.
Man, Jan, we burned through that hour pretty quickly.
We sure did. I just wanted to confirm, like, if somebody wanted to find someone who worked in that realm in another state, their best bet would be to go to the Institute for Functional Medicine.
So you could go to the Institute of Functional Medicine, and you could also use just, Google. You just have to be really careful, if you're looking for someone, are they of the level of training that you want? Okay, it depends on what you're looking for. Have they studied in this? Do they have certificates in this, and they enrolled in courses? Like, are they IFM certified or things like that? Google them, look them up, because so the problem is it's unregulated. So the other issue, and this is important, is that a lot of this stuff, especially the functional side, where you're doing testing and treatment and things like that, it's not covered by insurance. And so now you're in the world of cash-based medicine, where you have to really, really be careful, because it's cash-based and it's not covered by insurance. People want to take your money. So unfortunately, there are a lot of there are some folks out there that they'll use some of these tools or techniques, but their goal is just to sort of collect your cash. So you have to be really, really careful. That's one of the reasons I use a flat fee. I don't charge extra for each appointment or extra for this or that. I charge a flat fee for my time. And yeah, if you want to spend, I'll try to guide you to where to spend that money. But you have to be, so just be careful. Be a knowledgeable consumer.
I know we're over by a couple minutes, but this question I think is really important. How about people under 20? Should they limit their animal protein as well?
Probably everybody. Now, to be fair, you might treat it a little bit differently, because as you're growing and you're building tissues, you need protein, right? So protein is important for everybody. So I think this is one of the reasons why I'm not in the sort of vegan only camp, because you do need protein, and it is more challenging to get protein if you're just a vegan, if you're not getting any animal source of protein, whatever. So I think it's healthy to have a plant-forward diet from day one. One of the mistakes that I made as a parent, that I'm sure a lot of other people made as parent, is you give the kids the kid food, the chicken nuggets and the French fries and the stuff that's really bad for you, because it's easy to make it, it's easy for them to eat, and then we as adults, because we're there feeding them, we eat it too, and then it makes us unhealthy. From day one, the kids should be brought up on fruits and vegetables and lean meats, and you should start plant-forward diet from day one. Now, because it's hard for me to adjust to this, so I'm a very much sort of practice what you preach, if you will. So I've changed my whole lifestyle, and I'm evolving. I'm continuing to change it. Trying to I'm right now. My goal is to replace my turkey wrap for lunch, because I'm trying to cut down on my animal-based protein. So I'm eating lentils and chickpeas and things like that for lunch. And I'm looking for easy ways to do it, because I don't have time to, I'm not very good at lunch prep. So I need something I can put hot water in and mix. So I've got a couple of things that I'm trying now. So it's a process. I'm working on this too myself. It's not very, it's hard. It's hard to, but it's very doable. It's simple changes, consistent changes, very doable, can literally add years to your life.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mintz, for your time today and everything you've shared with us. We've got several comments about what great information it is in the chat. And Steve, thank you so much for co-hosting with Capital Senior Solutions. Any closing words from either of you?
Yeah, this was fantastic. Always great to hear your words of wisdom, Dr. Mintz, and looking forward to the next discussion with you.
Great. Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate you inviting me.
Thank you. Everyone have a great day.